the silence before the storm. The emergency transmission from Theta 7 had been broadcasting for 6 hours before it finally went silent. Ambassador David Chun sat in his quarters aboard the diplomatic station Horizon's Light, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair so tightly his knuckles had turned white. The final moments of the transmission played over and over in his mind, though he had stopped the recording hours ago. A young man, maybe 19 years old, had held the camera steady even as the sky behind him burned with the orange glow of orbital bombardment. His voice had been surprisingly calm as he spoke his last words to the universe. "My name is Marcus Liu. I'm a student at Theta 7 Agricultural College. The Kryn ships came 3 hours ago. They didn't send warnings. They didn't make demands. They just started killing everyone. My sister Sarah is 12 years old. She's hiding in the basement with Mom and Dad. I stayed up here to send this message because someone needs to know what happened here. Someone needs to remember us." The transmission had cut off mid-sentence. 23 million people had lived on Theta 7. It had been humanity's most successful agricultural colony, a world where families had built their homes and their futures over 3 generations. Children had played in parks their grandparents constructed. Farmers had turned barren soil into fertile fields. Teachers had educated the next generation of colonists who would spread human civilization further into the stars. Now those 23 million people were gone. Every single one of them had been systematically exterminated by the Kryn Collective's 4th Fleet. The attack had been methodical, efficient, and utterly without mercy. The Kryn had targeted civilian centers first, then agricultural zones, then isolated homesteads. They had made certain no one survived. Chun straightened his uniform and walked toward the Galactic Assembly chamber. He had requested an emergency session. The Assembly had granted it, though with clear reluctance. The massive doors opened before him, revealing the circular chamber where representatives of 42 spacefaring species gathered to discuss matters of galactic importance. The chamber was designed to inspire awe and humility. 42 elevated seats rose in concentric circles, each occupied by a representative of a Concord species. The Vrelian delegate, with its crystalline form refracting light into rainbow patterns, turned its sensory cluster toward Chun with something resembling sympathy. The Thoric delegate, massive and scaled like an ancient reptile from Earth's past, watched with unreadable eyes. The others showed varying degrees of interest, concern, or indifference. Chun walked to the speaker's platform at the chamber's center. His voice carried clearly in the acoustically perfect space. 23 million human beings were murdered yesterday. The Kryn Collective's 4th Fleet arrived at Theta 7 without warning and without provocation. They systematically exterminated every man, woman, and child on that world. They made no demands. They issued no ultimatums. They simply came and killed until no one remained alive. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the chamber. Humanity has been a member of this Galactic Assembly for 50 years. We have followed every protocol. We have honored every treaty. We have paid our dues and contributed our resources to the common good. We trusted that membership in this assembly meant something. We trusted that when danger came, the civilized species of this galaxy would stand together. The Vrelian delegate spoke first, its voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. The Assembly extends its deepest sympathies to humanity for this tragic loss. We will immediately begin drafting a formal condemnation of the Kryn Collective's actions. Condemnation? Chun felt something cold settle in his chest. You're going to draft a formal condemnation. 23 million people are dead, and you want to write a strongly worded letter. The Thoric delegate leaned forward, its massive form casting shadows across the chamber floor. Ambassador Chun, we understand your distress. However, the Kryn Collective commands significant military power. Direct confrontation could destabilize the entire sector. We must consider all implications before taking action. Implications? Chen's voice remained steady, but something in his tone made several delegates shift uncomfortably. Let me tell you about implications. Right now, the Kryn 4th Fleet is moving toward our colony at New Shanghai. 38 million more humans. Should we form a committee to study the implications while they die too? The eldest member of the assembly, a being called High Counselor Ven, spoke with what he clearly believed was wisdom. Ambassador, perhaps humanity should consider opening negotiations with the Kryn. Many conflicts arise from misunderstandings. It may be possible to resolve the situation through dialogue rather than confrontation. Chun stared at the High Counselor for a long moment. Negotiations. With the species that just committed genocide against my people. The species that murdered children in their schools and families in their homes. The species that laughed while they burned our cities. You want us to negotiate? Humanity is young in the ways of galactic politics, Ven continued. In time, you will understand that survival sometimes requires difficult compromises. Pride is a luxury that few species can afford. I understand perfectly, Chun said quietly. I understand that we stand alone. I understand that every promise made when we joined this assembly was worthless. I understand that 23 million deaths mean nothing to you because they weren't your people dying. He turned and walked toward the chamber exit. Behind him, the delegates began discussing the formation of a study committee to examine options for future response. None of them noticed the absolute cold fury in Chen's eyes as he left. Chun transmitted his full report to Earth that night. He detailed every word spoken in the assembly chamber. He described their sympathy, their caution, their advice to negotiate. He expected orders to begin evacuating other colonies. He expected his government to recall him in disgrace. He expected humanity to accept its place as a species too weak to defend itself. Instead, Earth went silent. For 5 days, no transmission came from the Sol system. The Earth government stopped responding to diplomatic queries. Human colonies reported the same thing across known space. Earth had simply stopped communicating with the rest of the galaxy. The silence was absolute and terrifying. Other species began to worry. Some thought humanity had fallen into despair and chaos. Others believed humans were secretly evacuating their colonies. A few wondered if Earth itself had been attacked. The Galactic Assembly sent multiple inquiries. All went unanswered. The Kryn Collective interpreted the silence as fear and defeat. Admiral Threxus, commander of the Kryn Fourth Fleet, sent a message boasting of his easy victory. He called humans weak prey and promised more blood soon. His fleet continued toward New Shanghai, confident in another massacre. On the 5th day, every communication device in the galaxy activated simultaneously. Chun was reviewing contingency plans for civilian evacuation when his terminal came to life without any input from him. The same thing happened on every ship, every station, every planet that possessed communications technology. Billions of beings across known space found themselves watching the same broadcast. A human appeared on every screen. She was middle-aged, unremarkable in appearance, with dark hair pulled back in a simple style. Her eyes were calm and cold. When she spoke, her voice carried no anger, no grief, no fear. She simply stated facts. This message is for the Galactic Assembly and the Kryn Collective. 5 days ago, 23 million human beings were murdered on Theta 7. We asked our fellow assembly members for help. We were told to negotiate. We were told to compromise. We were told that pride is a luxury we cannot afford. The woman paused. In that silence, something ancient and patient seemed to watch through her eyes. We have considered your advice carefully. We have rejected it. Another pause, longer this time. To the Galactic Assembly, you had the power to stand with us. You chose to stand aside. You chose committees over action, caution over courage, comfort over justice. We will remember this. We will always remember this. Do not ask anything of humanity again. We are done trusting you. The woman's expression didn't change, but her next words seemed to drop the temperature in rooms across the galaxy. To the Kryn Collective, you believe you understand what humanity is capable of. You are profoundly wrong. You expect us to send fleets and armies. You expect a war you can comprehend. You expect us to fight by rules you know. The silence stretched until it became almost unbearable. We are not going to fight by your rules. We are not going to wage the war you expect. What comes next you brought entirely upon yourselves. You murdered our children. You laughed while they screamed. You thought we were weak because we did not strike back immediately. The woman leaned slightly closer to whatever camera was recording her. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but somehow became more terrible for its quietness. We were not weak. We were busy. We were preparing. And now we are ready. The transmission ended with words that would echo across the galaxy for generations. The killing has not started yet. What you did to our children was killing. What we are about to do to you is something worse. We are going to teach you consequences. The screens went dark. Across known space, beings of many species looked at their human neighbors with new eyes. For 50 years, humanity had been friendly, helpful, eager to integrate. Humans had worked as engineers and doctors and teachers. They had learned alien languages and customs. They had built bridges between species and helped construct the infrastructure of galactic civilization. But something in that cold, patient voice reminded everyone of an ancient truth. Humans had not always been peaceful. Earth's history was written in blood and fire. Humanity had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of warfare against itself before finally learning to cooperate. They had invented weapons capable of rendering their homeworld uninhabitable. They had killed billions of their own kind before slowly, painfully, building a lasting peace. The galaxy had seen 50 years of humanity's smile. Now something else was showing through. Something that had been waiting and watching and learning. Something that remembered every name of every person who died screaming on Theta 7. Chun watched the transmission alone in his quarters. When it ended, he allowed himself a small, cold smile. He didn't know the details of Earth's plan, but he knew his people. He knew what humans were capable of when pushed beyond certain boundaries. The Kryn had wanted to demonstrate their power through genocide. They were about to learn that some demonstrations provoke responses beyond imagination. They were about to discover that humanity's integration into galactic society had not been simple eagerness to join. It had been preparation. 50 years of learning every system, every weakness, every dependency that held galactic civilization together. And now humanity was ready to pull specific threads and watch carefully chosen things unravel. The unraveling. Admiral Threxus stood on the bridge of his flagship and studied the tactical display with satisfaction. The Kryn Fourth Fleet was 3 days from New Shanghai. Intelligence indicated the human colony was completely defenseless. No military vessels orbited the planet. No weapons platforms defended its approaches. The humans had done exactly what he expected after Theta 7. They had frozen in fear. "Admiral," his communications officer called out. "We're receiving reports from the home territories. Multiple senior officers have died in the past 2 days." Threxus turned slowly. "Died how?" "That's unclear, sir. Commander Vrexith was found dead in his quarters this morning. No signs of violence, no evidence of intrusion. Medical examination shows his heart simply stopped. Captain Shelriff collapsed during a command briefing. Fleet Coordinator Thon died in his sleep. All told, we've lost 17 senior officers across the last 48 hours. Coincidence, Threxus said, but something cold touched his spine. A virus, perhaps. Increase medical screening for all command personnel. Yes, Admiral. But sir, there's a pattern. All 17 officers commanded vessels or ground forces during the Theta 7 operation. The cold feeling spread. Threxus forced it down. Double all security protocols. Triple guard rotations for senior staff. Find the cause and eliminate it. But the deaths continued. Over the next week, Kryn officers died across 24 worlds. Always the same pattern. No violence, no witnesses, no explanation. Heart stopped. Brains hemorrhaged. Lungs failed. One commander was found dead in a sealed room with 6 armed guards outside. The guards had heard nothing. Security systems showed no intrusions. The commander had simply died. Rumors spread through the Kryn military like fire through dry grass. Soldiers whispered about ghosts. They said the dead from Theta 7 had returned for revenge. They said the spirits of 23 million victims were hunting those who murdered them. Some soldiers refused to sleep alone. Others begged for transfers away from anyone who had participated in the attack. 3 soldiers killed themselves rather than wait for whatever was coming for them. Threxus executed 5 soldiers for spreading panic and fear. It accomplished nothing. The fear continued to spread because the deaths continued to happen. Then the infrastructure began failing. Started small. A water treatment facility on a minor colony world stopped functioning. Engineers couldn't determine why. The system simply refused to work despite showing no mechanical failures. A power grid serving a major city collapsed without warning. Backup systems engaged, then failed moments later. A hospital's life support network crashed, killing hundreds of patients. Across Kryn territory, systems that had functioned perfectly for decades suddenly stopped working. There were no attacks, no sabotage that investigators could find. Critical infrastructure simply failed at the worst possible moments, and no one could explain why. A young Kryn intelligence analyst named Shavara was the first to recognize the pattern. She had been studying the failures obsessively, searching for connections others missed. When she found it, the realization hit her like a physical blow. Every system that failed had been built or maintained with human assistance. Shavara brought her findings to the Intelligence Council. She stood before 5 of the most powerful military minds in the Kryn Collective and explained what humanity had done. When humans joined the Galactic Assembly 50 years ago, they spread throughout known space, she said. Not as conquerors or soldiers, but as workers, teachers, engineers, doctors, merchants. They were friendly and helpful. They learned our languages and customs. They asked for nothing except the opportunity to be part of galactic civilization. She pulled up a star chart showing human population distribution across the galaxy. Red dots marked human concentrations. The map was covered in red. No one questioned why they wanted to be everywhere. We thought they were simply grateful to join galactic society. We welcomed their help because they were useful and undemanding. They took jobs others didn't want. They maintained systems we considered beneath our attention. They became essential to infrastructure we took for granted. One council member leaned forward. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting they planned this for 5 decades. They weren't building a military because they didn't need one. They were building something far more effective. They made themselves indispensable. They learned every system, every network, every dependency. They gained access to everything that makes our civilization function. And now they're using that access to tear us apart from the inside." The council chamber fell silent. "It's impossible to know how many humans are part of this network," Shavara continued. "It could be all of them. Could be a small percentage. We can't tell the difference between a human engineer doing routine maintenance and a human saboteur embedding failsafes into critical systems. They've had 50 years to prepare. They know our weaknesses better than we know them ourselves. This is warfare without war," another council member said quietly. "They're destroying us without firing a shot." "No," Shavara corrected. "They're not trying to destroy us. If they wanted us dead, they could have crashed our life support systems simultaneously across every world. They could have poisoned our water supplies. They could have detonated our own weapons platforms. Instead, they're being selective. They're killing specific people. They're failing specific systems. They're sending a message." "What message?" "That they know everything. That they can reach anyone. That there's nowhere safe for those who participated in the Theta 7 genocide. They're not waging war. They're delivering consequences." Admiral Threxus received Shavara's report aboard his flagship. He read it 3 times, each reading making the implications more horrifying. He sat alone in his quarters afterward, trying to understand what he faced. Humanity wasn't fighting a traditional war because they couldn't win a traditional war. The Kryn military was vastly superior in ships, weapons, and soldiers. But humanity had spent 50 years building something else. They had created a network of ordinary people embedded in every aspect of galactic life. People who knew where the vulnerabilities were because they had helped create them. People who had been waiting patiently for a reason to activate. And the Kryn had given them that reason. A message arrived on Threxus's personal terminal. It came through a channel that only his immediate family should know. a channel that should have been impossible for outsiders to access. The message contained 3 things. First, his birth name, the name his mother had called him before she died when he was very young. A name he had never spoken aloud since leaving his homeworld 40 years ago. Second, a detailed description of his deepest fear. Something he had never told anyone. Something he had buried so deeply he sometimes forgot it himself. Third, a list. It contained the names of every single person who had died on Theta 7. All 23 million of them. And at the bottom, a simple note. We know everything about you. We know where you sleep. We know what you fear. We know everyone you love. We could kill you right now in 100 different ways. But we won't. Not yet. We want you to feel what our people felt. Helpless. Terrified. Waiting for death that could come at any moment. The difference is that our people were innocent. You are not. The message ended with a promise that made Threxus check over his shoulder despite being alone in a locked room. We remember every name. When you can recite them all from memory, perhaps we'll consider your death payment enough. Threxus stared at the message for a long time. Then he did something he hadn't done since childhood. He looked around his quarters with genuine fear, checking shadows and corners for threats he couldn't see. Someone was always watching now. That was the horror of it. The paranoia spread faster than any weapon could have. Kryn soldiers began attacking human civilians, certain they were saboteurs. This made everything worse. Every innocent human killed created more anger, more determination, more names to add to humanity's list. The Kryn Fourth Fleets advanced toward New Shanghai, slowed, then stopped. Officers refused orders, afraid that moving forward would make them targets. Soldiers deserted rather than participate in another genocide. The mighty Kryn military was paralyzed not by superior force but by the simple knowledge that their enemies were invisible, patient, and absolutely unforgiving. Meanwhile, across Kryn space, more officers died. More systems failed. More civilians found their daily lives disrupted by failures no one could predict or prevent. Water became unreliable. Power flickered. Medical equipment malfunctioned. Nothing was catastrophic. Everything was unsettling. The psychological toll was devastating. A Kryn general named Vorshith, who had commanded ground forces during the Theta 7 operation, finally broke. For weeks he had received messages. Photos of the people his soldiers had killed. Stories about their lives. Questions about whether he remembered their names or faces. He stopped sleeping. He stopped eating. He saw faces in shadows and heard screams in silence. When he received a message containing information about his own daughter, including her school schedule and favorite playground, he understood that his family would never be safe. Vorshith gathered his most loyal officers and planned a second attack. If they could destroy another human colony, he reasoned, they could show that the Kryn could not be intimidated. They could restore fear in the proper direction. His officers killed him before he could give the order. They broadcast their surrender on open channels. They named every officer who had participated in the Theta 7 massacre. They begged for mercy, not from human weapons, but from human memory. We were wrong, the senior surviving officer said in the broadcast. We thought humans were weak because they didn't have powerful fleets. We were fools. They fight with knowledge. They fight with patience. They fight with perfect memory of every crime committed against them. We cannot win this war because it is not a war we know how to fight. The officer's voice broke slightly. We surrender. We will face whatever justice humanity demands. We ask only that our families be spared the knowledge of what we did. Let that be the only mercy you grant us. The surrender spread across Kryn space like a dam breaking. Officers who had participated in the genocide turned themselves in, not because they feared death but because they feared something worse. They feared living the rest of their lives knowing that somewhere, somehow, humans were watching and waiting and remembering. The Kryn High Council met in their most secure bunker to discuss terms. Layers of security protected them. Armed guards stood at every entrance. Scanning systems monitored every cubic meter of surrounding space. When they looked up from their discussions, a human woman was sitting at the table with them. She was middle-aged and ordinary-looking, She could have been any of the thousands of humans who had worked and lived among the Kryn for decades. She smiled at them, and in that smile was something ancient and implacable. "Hello," she said. "My name is Director Sarah Chen. I'm here to discuss how this ends." Every guard raised their weapons. Director Chen didn't move. "You can kill me if you want," she said calmly. "Another human will take my place tomorrow, and another the day after that. We've been here for 50 years. We're embedded in every system you depend on. You cannot remove us without destroying yourselves." She folded her hands on the table. "Shall we discuss your surrender?" The council leader, a warrior named Cathis, stared at her with all four eyes. "What do you want?" "I want you to remember," Chun said simply. "That's all humanity has ever wanted. Remember what you did. Remember who died. Remember that actions have consequences. The question is whether you learn that lesson now or after more of your people suffer for your leader's crimes." She produced a document and slid it across the table. "These are our terms." The terms were not gentle, but they were not genocidal. Every Kryn who had participated in the Theta 7 attack would face public trial. An entire world would be dedicated as a memorial to the dead, with all 23 million names preserved forever. Kryn children would learn human history for 3 generations, understanding both humanity's capacity for peace and the terrible consequences of pushing them too far. "You want to change who we are," Cathis said. "We want to give you the chance to become better," Chun replied. "Punishment alone changes nothing. Only understanding and education can prevent this from happening again. You have 2 choices. Accept these terms and begin the long process of making peace with your past, or reject them and continue as things are now." "What if we reject your terms?" Chen's smile didn't change. "Then we continue. Your systems keep failing. Your officers keep dying. Your people keep living in fear. We've been preparing for 50 years. We can continue for 50 more. We are extraordinarily patient when we choose to be." The council argued for hours. Chun sat quietly and waited. She didn't negotiate. She didn't compromise. She simply waited for them to understand that they had no other choice. They signed. The broadcast of the signing reached every inhabited world in the galaxy. Billions watched the Kryn leadership accept responsibility for genocide and agree to humanity's terms. They watched the list of those who would face trial scroll across their screens. They watched the plans for the memorial world unfold. And they watched something else. They watched humanity turn toward the Galactic Assembly. Ambassador David Chun stood before the Assembly one final time. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't demand anything. He simply informed them of how things would be. "We trusted you," he said quietly. "We trusted that membership in this assembly meant something. We trusted that civilized species would stand together against genocide. You failed us completely." High Counselor Ven tried to speak. "Ambassador, surely we can find a path forward together." "We can," Chen said. "But it will be on our terms. Humanity will no longer depend on this assembly for protection. We will no longer ask permission to defend ourselves. We will continue to participate in galactic commerce and society. But we will never again believe that you will help us when we truly need you." He let that sink in. "That is not a threat. It is simply a fact. You taught us that we stand alone. We will never forget that lesson." The assembly had no response. What could they say? They had watched humanity plead for help and offered only words. They had watched humanity solve the problem in a way that terrified them. They had learned that the quiet, friendly humans they had welcomed 50 years ago were something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Across the galaxy, humanity's message was clear. They would be peaceful neighbors when treated with respect. They would be valuable partners in commerce and science. They would contribute to galactic civilization with enthusiasm and creativity. But they would never forget. And they would never forgive those who stood aside when genocide was committed against them. The age of humanity's innocence was over. The galaxy had seen what humans could do when pushed beyond certain boundaries. They had seen patience weaponized, integration turned into a strategic asset, and memory transformed into an unstoppable force. And every species that witnessed it understood one simple truth. Humanity remembered. Always. Forever. Without exception. The killing had not started yet, as Earth's first message had warned. What humanity had delivered instead was something the Kryn would argue was far worse. They had delivered perfect, inescapable consequence. They had delivered a lesson the entire galaxy would never forget. Some species fight with weapons. Humanity fought with memory, patience, and the absolute certainty that actions must have consequences. And they had won without firing a single shot. That's the end of our story. If this gave you chills, make sure you're subscribed because we have more incredible HFY stories coming your way. Hit that like button and share this with your fellow sci-fi fans. What did you think of humanity's response? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss our next upload.